Not only do they not get taught the coping mechanisms that they need, but they also get physically abused and emotionally abused. In my head. Hello everybody, if you're new here, I do mental health videos Monday through Friday, although I may not do one tomorrow, but usually Monday through Friday. Hit subscribe if you're interested in mental health and keeping your mind and everything else connected to it good. And after you hit subscribe, hit the bell if you want to get notified every time I do a video. I want to say thank you. Come on, people. I want to take a quick second to thank my patrons over on Patreon. You know who you are. I appreciate you being there, and I've been working on stress reduction worksheets, stress regulation worksheets, so those should be up, hopefully, for this video. They most likely will be because I've been working on them. I just have a few little tweaks I need to do, so check those out. And if you're not a patron, you can go over there. They're free worksheets available for you right now. You don't have to do anything. They're already free. But if you enjoy the worksheets, if you need extra help, I have other resources over there regarding your mental health. So consider becoming a patron if you enjoy this video and you enjoy the content on my channel. Tonight we're going to talk about family dysfunction, dysfunctional families. I have experience with this myself. I have a lot to say about it, so let's talk about it. My stress level is very high tonight. I am not able to go to a lot of places where I normally record. I was stressed before coming out here. I didn't want to do it, so just be aware. Let's talk about dysfunctional families. So my family is dysfunctional. My parents divorced I would say between my ages of 8 to 13, so it was a long drawn out process. It was not enjoyable, and it happened as a result of dysfunctional configurations within the family. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons why it happened. We don't need to go into that, but so I understand this subject better. So what are some things that happen in dysfunctional families? Well, one thing that's very common is enmeshment. So enmeshment is when we don't have proper boundaries. And before I even get into enmeshment and boundaries, maybe I want to start with roles, in a family. And I'm not so familiar with family therapy and family systems and all of this, so I'm just going with what I know. We typically have roles in the family, and there's a natural hierarchy to a family in that parents are stronger and in more control of the family than their children are. They're just physically stronger. They've had more experience in life, and they're able to overpower children should that be something that they wish to do. Hopefully not, because that would not be a healthy family function. But there are roles. We have birth order between children, and adults are supposed to take on certain roles and children are supposed to take on certain roles. And when it comes to enmeshment and boundaries, these roles play an important part, because what we find is that boundaries get violated. So you may see a child being sexual in some way, like an adult is sexualizing a child, maybe having sexual relations with that child. That would be inappropriate. Children are not developed for sexual relations, both physiologically and in their brain. They're just not developmentally ready for that. And you may also see situations where the child is trying to put an adult in an inappropriate role, maybe having a friendship with the child. The adult may co-conspire in that and then try to be their friend, which is also inappropriate, because an adult is supposed to be guiding the child, and the adult is supposed to be leading the child through life and helping them develop positive coping mechanisms and positive interpersonal relations. So you see this improper use of boundaries and what's called enmeshment, where people's boundaries constantly get walked over. People's roles are constantly switching where they shouldn't be. A child might be going to the supermarket or doing babysitting, not appropriate for a child. A parent may be sharing intimate details of their life, very emotionally charged details that are not, again, appropriate for a child. The child is not built and equipped to handle that kind of emotional situation. That's something maybe a friend of the parent should be taking care of, not the child. So that's kind of talking about enmeshment in terms of the roles of the relationship, which is where I believe the term enmeshment actually originated from, was discussing roles. But there's also boundaries in terms of our physical boundaries. So that would be where maybe inappropriate sexual relations between brothers and sisters, between adults and children, cousins, all that kind of stuff. Those would be improper physical boundaries, and as well as things like hitting, and something that people very often overlook, which would be spanking. There's been a number of studies that show that spanking can be traumatizing, that spanking can have long-term adverse effects on a child, and we see this in dysfunctional families because the parents feel that they can't get control over their child, and so they try to spank them, try to beat them into submission is one way to put it. And it's a control tactic, but it's not a raising a child tactic, it's a control tactic. You know, for contrast, healthy child raising involves nurturing the child's needs, understanding when they're emotionally dysregulated, like angry, like throwing temper tantrums, and calming them down and listening to them and validating their experience. And yes, in some ways, control is not the right word. Getting them to a point where they understand that certain behaviors are not acceptable. So you may remove a child from a situation, you may possibly hold a child in a way so that they can't go kicking and screaming. I do understand some children have a difficult temperament, but controlling a child through hitting, through physicalness, punishment, those are all ways that we treat, they're just disrespectful ways to treat anything, you know. Some of these tactics maybe we use on animals, and even that I would disagree with, that it's not a proper way to treat any living being that has feelings, that has emotions, that can feel pain. So we see this kind of stuff in dysfunctional relationships, in dysfunctional families, and it leads to traumatic experiences very often for children, because children do not have the coping mechanisms to deal with these kinds of situations. And when we do this to them, when parents do this to them, they probably aren't teaching them the coping mechanisms to deal with it. So not only do they not get taught the coping mechanisms that they need, but they also get physically abused and emotionally abused. Okay, so speaking of emotional abuse, we should talk about these roles that have been conceptualized of the scapegoat and the golden child. These are typically children in families, but they could really be anybody. And the scapegoat is kind of somebody that the entire family dumps all their emotional garbage on, and dumps their frustrations and their anger and anything negative gets kind of like thrown into the scapegoat of the family. And if you are that scapegoat, that is incredibly painful and very traumatizing. So as a family, we have to be aware if we are singling out one person and dumping everything into them. Alternatively, we also sometimes have a golden child, and sometimes we have the scapegoat and the golden child in the same family. And the golden child gets praised and put up on a pedestal, but what people sometimes fail to miss about the golden child is that the golden child's needs are also not being met. They may not be getting punished as much, they may not be getting, you know, spanked and slapped and emotionally abused. However, they are being neglected because their desires are not being listened to. They're being told that they are wonderful because of whatever the parents envision for them. And typically parents are not listening to what the golden child actually wants for their own life, and their life becomes about living up to this fake pedestal that they've been put on. Now, I know that the science has not actually proven this yet, but there's been little links to trauma and personality disorders here, but it's not that far of a stretch to understand why somebody who was a scapegoat might become narcissistic in defense against that, and somebody who was a golden child may also become narcissistic. And it doesn't have to be narcissism. I personally believe that I developed borderline personality disorder, and I think a lot of the reason why that happened was because of the family dynamics that I found myself in. And we could go as far as to say antisocial personality disorder could develop from it, and a whole host of mental problems could happen as a result of family dysfunction. The reason why I bring up personality disorders in specific is because we know that dialectical behavior therapy works for most people for treating borderline personality disorder. And dialectical behavior therapy is really just teaching people coping skills that they should have been taught in childhood, that should have happened in the family anyway. So it's not a stretch to think that maybe a dysfunctional family, you know, Martha Linehan, the creator of dialectical behavior therapy, she called it an invalidating environment. When your emotions are constantly denied and pushed away and you're told not to be who you are, you develop all these defenses in reaction to that, and dialectical behavior therapy helps you to start to remove some of those defenses and find healthier ways to cope with stress. Okay, it's a little dark out here. I'm just going to try to wrap this up. So I wanted to talk about emotional abuse. First of all, I've experienced emotional abuse where We sometimes, well, we might be physically abused and also emotionally abused, and part of that emotional abuse is trying to tell us not to feel the way that we're feeling, tell us not to tell other people what's going on. It becomes like there's a family secret and you protect the family, and in doing so you protect your abusers. I know they're your parents or your siblings or whoever, but you're protecting your abusers. And so in doing so, if we're taught these behaviors in children, what we learn is to never speak up for ourselves, never say how we're feeling, to fear when we speak up for ourselves that something's going to happen back to us in retribution, that we're going to be hurt in some way. And it's not a stretch to imagine how that goes into adulthood and how that can harm us. Very often when we become adults, we pass these behaviors on to our children. We either adopt the behaviors because that's what we were taught and that's just what we always know, or we go the opposite direction and we react very strongly against them and wind up doing something that's still emotionally abusive but opposites. So an example of that might be if you were hit a lot as a child, you may think, well, I'm never going to hit my child, I'm going to become my child's best friend, and then you cross the boundary of adult child and you get too involved in your child's life and you never allow them to have their own space and their own autonomy, and that's still abusive. So I could go on and on about this. I would love to hear from you. What have you experienced in your dysfunctional family, or maybe you've heard friends talk about their dysfunctional family? How has that changed how you have grown up? If you're somebody who grew up in a dysfunctional family, you may have trouble with things like boundaries, self-esteem, and stress regulation. I have worksheets for those up on my Patreon page. Those are completely free, and if you enjoy the content here that I do on my YouTube channel, consider becoming a patron, as some have recently. Thank you again to those who have. It allows me to do what I do here, and if you are new here and you enjoy this kind of topic, then please hit subscribe. I do mental health videos Monday through Friday. I'm probably not going to do tomorrow because something's going on around here. I'm stressed out. I just need a break. So that is what it is, but I appreciate you for being here with me tonight, and thank you, and I will see you the next time.